Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're going from 1000 to 2000 elo in chess.com rapid games, and during the games I'm going to be explaining my thought process as best as I possibly can for your education and entertainment. Today we are against the Caro Kann Defense. The Caro Kann is my favourite opening for the black pieces, and the move that I like to play against the Caro Kann is b3, known as the Över attack. I think that's how you pronounce it. And the whole point is to give up the pawn on e4. And this is probably something that, if you play the Caro Kann, you may never have seen before, because it's kind of not a real opening. It's kind of an adaptation of the same gambit against the French defense. Technically, it works better against the French defense, because in the French, the pawn is on e6, so the bishop can't come to f5 to protect the pawn. But after knight c3, we go after the pawn. Black obviously has to defend. And there's actually a multitude of ways that black can go wrong already. For example, bishop to f5 is inaccurate because it allows the move g4 with tempo on the bishop. My opponent plays knight to f6. And here white can very easily go wrong because when you play this against the French setup with the pawn on e6, the move is queen e2. And this pawn can't be defended a third time unless black plays queen d4, which is incredibly risky because of the alignment with the bishop. Here, though, queen e2 would be a bad move because of bishop to f5, and then you can't add another attacker to the e4 pawn. So the correct move is actually knight g to e2, which looks very slow. But black can't really do anything about the move knight to g3, and then queen e2, and the e-pawn will fall. Now, the computer essentially gives these positions as equal. However, bishop to g4 is a bad move. This is what I mean. Like, if I remember correctly, bishop g4 is inaccurate, even though it looks so natural, because we just go h3. And if the bishop retreats, we go g4. And then I believe bishop g2 is playable. The point is that h3 g4 not only begins our kingside expansion, because we're going to castle queenside, but it also means that bishop to g2 can come immediately, and we don't have to prepare it with g3, because our opponents just let us go h3 and g4 with tempo. But I think it's most accurate to start with knight to g3, and then I think queen e2, so that we can castle quickly, and the bishop can come to g2 at any time. This pawn isn't going anywhere. There's not really a concern. Black can push the pawn to e3 and try to give the pawn up on his own terms, but I believe we just take with the f-pawn. And then, I mean, we can even play bishop g2 and castle kingside, but most people don't play the move e3. Most people will play something like e6 or knight b to d7 and just try and get their king castled. My opponent goes h5. And this doesn't look correct. This doesn't look correct because I believe we just go g5. If I remember this. Yeah, I think we just go g5. And these positions are so complicated. Mainly because, like I said, it's not actually a real opening. So nobody really knows what to do against it. And I've got a really good win rate in this opening against the Caro Kann, and the same against the French defense, because a lot of the ideas overlap. Now, this video will be linked to two different playlists. Firstly, it will be linked to the previous episodes of the speedrun, so check those out if you're interested down below. And the second playlist this will be added to is my games with 2b3, like the move b3 on the second move against the French defense, because, again, a lot of the ideas overlap, whether it's against the French or the Caro. Okay, my opponent goes h4, counter-attacking my knight, which is an interesting idea. Can we take? Well, if we take and take, then we can't really take either of these pawns, because black will take on f2 with check first. Then our king will be forced to f2, and that looks very, very bad. Maybe g5 wasn't the right move. I don't know. I mean, we could move our knight. We could just go, like, knight back to e2. This knight's going to have to move. Let's say knight to d5. and then bishop g2. Maybe bishop g2 immediately in this position was better, so that after h5, g5, there is no h4 attacking the knight. So maybe I got that mixed up. But okay, h4 on the board. If take, we could take back on g3. And then my opponent has to choose which pawn to take back on f6 with. I would assume the e-pawn to open the bishop up would make the most sense to me. And then queen e2 looks natural. We prepare to castle. Bishop g2 is still coming. I think I like that. Now, the h-file is open for my opponent, but it's very difficult for my opponent to castle kingside because I can just throw this pawn down the board and probably crush him. So, if I am thinking about this position correctly, I have to take, queen e2, if bishop d6... Sorry. If take, queen e2, bishop d6 attacking the g3 pawn, if we castle and give this pawn up, is that a viable plan? After knight takes e4, my opponent, if he... Well, no, that comes with an attack on the bishop, actually, and we have threats of discovered check, so my opponent will be forced to trade his bishop to avoid losing material. We take on e4 with check. If queen to e7... if queen e7... I think we have queen to f3, preparing rook e1, pinning the queen. That's incredibly convoluted, I know, but I'm pretty sure that works. I'm pretty sure that works. Now, my opponent could take with the g-pawn. He could take with the g-pawn. But then I'm not concerned, because there's no bishop d6 attacking my pawn on g3, because after takes, I will have to take to avoid my opponent taking on f2 with check. And I think that position is absolutely fine. I think there's a lot of dynamism going on, and it's going to be pretty difficult for my opponent to get his king safe here. I think it's going to be very difficult. He takes on g3, which I think is the correct move. And yeah, I'm pretty sure I've just got to take back, because I can't allow this. So we'll take back. This pawn is weak, absolutely. But I'm pretty sure black's got to take my f-pawn first. I mean, he could play a move like queen d6. He could. Going after the g3 pawn and ignoring my f6 pawn. That is possible. And then what? Maybe queen g4, threatening queen to c8 and defending. Takes back with the g-pawn. That feels very weird. That feels really weird. Okay, well, I think queen e2. Let's play it. Let's not spend too much time. If e3 is played, trying to get me to take with the d pawn, because if here and I take with the queen, then c2 hangs. That stops me from castling. But yeah, f5, it makes sense because you're defending your e pawn. But don't you just blunder this with the attack on the rook? Of course, I could just castle and claim that I'm really, like, my development is great, and I can maybe start a pawn storm over here to lock the bishop out the game. But I'm pretty sure this just wins. Well, not immediately wins, but we have threats of knight to f6 check, which would actually be checkmate, because the pawn is pinned to the king. So after knight takes, you have to take the knight back, and then I take the rook. If you try to play f6 to lock my bishop in, I don't think that works. Because can't we just shove this pawn down the board? Or even shove this pawn up the board? And also you're weakening this diagonal massively. I don't think that's very concerning. Is there another square we can put the knight on that might be better? I don't think so. Because this is the only square that threatens mate, other than knight to d5. But then queen takes, bishop takes, and then after f6, there's actually queen g8 ideas to win the bishop very quickly. Maybe that can be played immediately, though. If here, f6... Well, then we have queen g4, counter-attacking the bishop. And if king f7, then we have bishop c4, and we just win. So, yeah, I'm confident knight takes e4 is the correct move. Oh my god, this is going to be a quick video, isn't it? This is going to be a quick video. Ooh. Oh, knight f6, mate. That is disgusting. That is disgusting. And it's actually worse than that because we're also attacking the rook. Oh, wow. Well, this is why I like the 2b3 system against the Caro Kann, because look at the absolute chaos that unfolded over just 14 moves. I mean, I assume this position is still winning for white after this. An f6 queen g4, right? Yeah, I think I calculate that correctly. Awesome. I will do an analysis on this, and normally I would play a second game, but to be honest, I'm really strapped for time today. So this is going to be a bit of a shorter video, unfortunately, but it should hopefully show just how strong this system is against the Caro Kann and why I love it so much. So let's get into the analysis, and I'll flesh out some more of the ideas behind this opening. Okay, so the computer gives 90.7% accuracy. It turns out I think I made one mistake, which might have been knight to g3. I think bishop g2 might have been the move, so we will find that out. By the way, if you enjoyed the game, then please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I would really appreciate it. It really helps to motivate me with these daily uploads. But let's look at the game. So e4, c6, and of course, you know, moves like d4, moves like knight c3, moves like knight f3, they're all very standard. I go b3, and you can see the computer already thinks that black is better, slightly. But I guarantee black has never seen this. My opponent probably saw this and was like, what on earth is my opponent doing? And the thing is, after d5, bishop b2, black can just take on e4. And he is just better. But he has to prove that. Now, in this position, the computer wants to move e5. And the idea is that you can play bishop to b2 to support your e5 pawn. But I'm trying to play a gambit. I'm trying to confuse my opponent and spice the game up immediately in a position that is slightly worse for me, but I know far better than my opponent does. So bishop b2, d takes e4, knight c3. We immediately go after this pawn. Now, bishop to f5, watch the eval bar, is actually a mistake here. Because of g4, the difference is, with the knight on f6, black has two attackers on g4, so g4 can't be played because it's only defended once. If the bishop comes to f5 first, though, there is only one attacker and one defender. If the bishop goes back to like d7, then you can just take on e4, and white is a lot better. So black has to hold on to the pawn with bishop g6. White then has ideas of bishop g2, like I said, because this pawn moves with tempo, like what happened in the game with h3, g4. So the bishop can come to g2, but h4 is more accurate, immediately going after the bishop. h5 would trap the bishop. So black either goes h5 and allows g5, which stops knight to f6, which is black's only other real good way of defending the pawn. Because a move like queen to d4 is just suicidal. It's just suicidal. Like queen e2, e6, castles, there's threats of like knight e4, knight b5. It's bad. It's bad. This discovery is an issue. So my opponent goes knight f6. That is the best move, right? So if bishop f5, you immediately go g4. But my opponent goes knight f6. And as you can see, the eval bar hates the position for white, but black has to prove it. I go knight g to e2. And my opponent makes a mistake. Bishop g4 is not a good move. Now, what happens if bishop to f5? By the way, g6 is the best move. And I don't think anybody has ever played this against me. Like, this has never been played against me. And I also don't even think it's that good. Because black can't take here because I take on g7. The computer just wants to get castled quickly. I mean, I could immediately just hurt black's structure if I really want to. But more pressing, I would say, is moves like h4. They look pretty scary to me. Queen c1 is apparently a move. d4 is also a move. Not gonna lie, I would prefer to have the white pieces here, regardless of what the computer says. More natural is to move bishop to f5 in this position, and this is how most of my games go. And the point of bringing the knight to e2 is that it can go to g3 with tempo on the bishop. Most people play bishop g6 because it's the most natural move, and then h4 threatens the same idea of h5. Black either goes h6, allows h5, bishop h7, and then queen e2. We're going to win this pawn back. And you can see the eval bar is already back to equal, except we know this position better than our opponent knows it. Or black plays h5 and stops our idea of h5, and then we still just go queen e2. And the same thing happens, right? If black ever plays something like e3, then we can't really take with the queen because of bishop c2. We just take with the d-pawn. The rook is going to come to d1. If knight bd7, we can castle queenside, and the rook is on the open file. I don't actually know how the computer believes that this is an equal position. I would say advantage white here. All day, every day. h5 is weak, this diagonal is strong, our king is very good, our rook is strong. This is a great position. The only thing you need to be concerned about is moves like e6, queen a5. Let's say, I don't know, queen d2, queen a5. There are threats of bishop to a3, forcing a trade of bishops because the bishop is pinned. Just go king b1. Whenever bishop to a3 is threatened with a trade of bishops, just go king b1. And bishop a3 can be met with bishop to a1 in most cases. This one apparently not. This one we apparently have to trade, but it's worth noting. It's worth noting. Bishop g4 is what my opponent played. h3. If my opponent takes, then of course we just take back and this pawn is falling. Again, queen to d4 is too risky because of queenside castle, and our bishop is defended and we have discoveries. At the very least, we can do this. No, sorry, we can't do that because of sorry, because the queen will just take. But we have like g4, bishop g2, and then this. This doesn't work because of queen b6, so we just have to return anyway. But we will be winning this pawn back at some point. Be patient. h3, the bishop goes back. g4, the bishop goes back, and yeah, so knight g3 isn't the best move. I thought bishop g2 was better, which it is, but knight f4 is even better, which I've never seen this before in this opening, actually. Like I said, it's not a real opening, which is why nobody knows it. But knight f4 just goes after the bishop. If knight bd7, bishop g2 or queen e2, let's say e6, queenside castle, and let's say queen a5, king b1, bishop a3, bishop a1, kingside castle. Here we're winning because we just push, but we can take the bishop and then take the pawn at any time. We can also add another attacker with bishop to g2, so we will be winning this pawn back eventually. But I went knight g3, and my opponent finds the best move with h5. Turns out g5 is my mistake. Wow. So bishop g2 has to be played. And after take, if a rook trade happens, the pawn is still falling. So if e6, queen e2, knight bd7, we just take. Something like takes, and we're just good. We're going to queenside castle, maybe put the rook on h1, and white is better. Okay, worth noting, so g5 is a mistake, and my opponent finds the best move with h4. I went g takes f6, which is the best move, h takes g3, and here, taking like this is bad, because your opponent takes on f2, your king cannot castle, bishop g7, this position is lost. So you have to take on g3 first. And yeah, so I'm actually correct in saying that queen d6 or queen c7 is a better idea, because this pawn is going nowhere. Queen c7 is the best move, attacking the pawn. I had prepared queen g4, which is the best move. And after something like ef6, queenside castle, the position is still fine. The position's still fine. After f5, I'm not going to win this pawn back immediately, but I think this position is more than playable. Against a computer, you will probably lose this, sure, but against a human, I think this is tough for black. This bishop sucks. This bishop's amazing. This bishop can come to c4 and be really good, or g2. The rooks have open files. The h-pawn is annoying. I take this position with white. My opponent takes on f6. We go queen e2, which is the best move, attacking e4. My opponent goes f5, which is a mistake because of knight e4. What can black do here? He can go queen d6, attacking the pawn. My plan was to queenside castle and give the pawn up. Take back on e4, open up the bishop. We have threats, the queen's under attack. And after bishop e4, queen e4, black has to find either rook h4 or queen h4. If knight d7, it defends f6, because obviously the pawn isn't defending it because of the pin. We have moves like h4, we can go bishop e2. This is fine. I mean, black's going to castle queenside, but the game is certainly not over. We have a passed h-pawn. Like, that's a big deal. The f-pawn is passed, but it's pretty easy to stop. f5's a mistake. Now, another thing I was calculating was if here, queen e2, queen d6, queenside castle, queen takes, I thought after knight e4 I was winning, because the queen's under attack, knight f6 ideas are threatened with discovered checks, and I thought black has to trade his bishop, which I'm correct in saying, and a move like bishop e7 is going to be losing because this pin is a big issue. So king d8 has to be played, and yeah, this is just completely winning for white. My opponent takes on f6 with the g-pawn. It's a mistake, but it's a lot better than taking with the e-pawn. Black can't really afford to open this e-file up. So gf6, queen e2, f5 is the mistake, and we could queenside castle, but then bishop g7 and black is okay. Knight e4 is the killer, because this is an issue, and this is an issue, and black has to go for this. This is what black has to go for. And my thought process was, well, maybe f6 can trap the bishop? Apparently there's bishop g7? And if bishop g7, queen g4, and if king f7 defending, then bishop c4 is the killer, like I thought. More likely, however, is after take here, I was going to go queen g4. This still can't be played because of bishop c4 check. So the bishop would have to retreat, and then there is bishop g7 with the bishop trade. The h-pawn's going to fly down the board. I'm going to castle queens. Well, I don't even have to castle queenside. I can go something like bishop g2, castle kingside if I really want, which might actually be better because of the weak dart squares on the queen side. But my opponent, of course, blunders mate in 1 with knight to f6 checkmate, and it's a very aesthetic checkmate. Very aesthetic. It's a smothered mate because all of black's pieces are stopping him from moving to avoid the mate, and of course the e-pawn is pinned so the knight cannot be taken. This is actually quite a common idea in other Caro Kann lines, but come on, that's an awesome game. And I really would encourage you to try this system with the white pieces. Look at some of the theory, and maybe re-watch the parts of the video where I'm talking about the theory with like knight g2, e2, bishop f5, knight g3, bishop g6, h4, because this is worth knowing. So re-watch those areas of the video if you want to play this opening. This is really the only bit of the theory you need to know. As long as you can survive this part of the opening, you're going to have a great time. This is really nice to play for white. This bishop is an absolute monster, as we saw in the game. And remember the key ideas. Check out the playlist below if you want to see the my games in the 2b3 French, because a lot of the ideas transpose. Check out the video over here if you want to see a really cool game of me using the Caro Kann Defense. And check out the playlist down here, oh my god, down here, if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun.